Good morning, everyone. Today's learning is dedicated to memory of Leah Bas Fiber, Rav Yaakov Tzvi, David ben David Aryeh, Tzivia Bas Mordechai from Ben David Slavin, Shlom ben Yisrael Morris, Tzipora Fegel Bas Reuven Baruch, Shalom ben Eleli, Ben Bas Fiber, Prabhu Shoshana Bas Yaakov, Shmuel Kela Bela Bas Henach Yirmiyahu Yechiel ben Echav Moshe Eliezer, Sarmaka Bas Binyamin, as well as the yortzites for today, which are Gittel Bas Shlomo Hopton, Natan ben David Solomon, Yeshayahu Kolonim ben Michael Black, Shana Bas Yitzchak Silverman, Baruch Richmond, which all of their respective families, long life and only symptoms. So we continue where we left off. I hope everyone is well. Good morning to Michelle, Colin, Michael, and Peter, amongst others. And we were discussing about the idea of silence. And in fact, there was, we may remember a few Yom Kippurs ago, we spoke about the record which was made of silence, and somebody picked the previous record holder for making a recording which was actually sold of silence. Okay, so silence in itself can also be noise, right? We speak about a deafening silence when we which speaks volumes about what we don't say as much as what we do say. So that's point number one. So I want to move on a bit, still discussing about silence. Okay, so obviously it goes without saying that we mentioned yesterday that one who is accustomed to be silent is saved from many transgressions, from flattery, from levity, from slander, from falsehood, and from insults. Now, I think one of the things that in the modern context is to bear in mind is that when we speak about silence, we're not just speaking about using our mouths, although primarily we are. It also is any form of communication. So be it when we are writing, when we are texting, when we are making social media statements, whatever it may be, right? That is all the form of communicating with somebody else. And therefore, silence also can be sometimes where we put that email to one side and we think twice before we send it, or that flippant text, or for example, the letter that we write. Very often I write something and I think about it overnight. And there are many, I think Rabbi Strauss Salanta, who was that, wrote many letters and then left them in the drawer, and those letters were never sent. Because in the heat of the moment, it can be that we feel very strongly and passionately about something and we want to make very strong statements, and then silence seems to be, in retrospect, the best way forward. And that also is a way of making a statement. Sometimes, of course, silence is bad. And that is, for example, if we were to stay silent when there are things going around which are wrong, right, which are evil, then we would be complicit with it. So there is a time for us to speak up, and it would be a transgression to remain silent. Give an example. Let's say anti-Semitism, right? Let's say that you're aware of something, or the Jewish community becomes aware of something, or any type of discrimination, and you decide to stay silent, to ignore it, to turn a blind eye. That would be wrong. Any type of injustice that we witness, or that we have the capability of doing anything about, even communicating with our MPs or lobbying other parties, that would be wrong for us to remain silent, okay? Because we have a corrective responsibility. So if we were to hear people mocking the rabbis, the sages, any of the establishment that represents Judaism, that would also be wrong, and that would undermine what we stand for. So moving on, one must take care not to shame anyone or to distress the person with words. If you're sitting next to somebody who has a blemish of which they are ashamed, or there is a blemish in their children or their wife that he's ashamed, or a defect in his family, you must be careful not to speak about it, right? So it's not just a physical blemish or a genealogical blemish, but let's say that somebody in the past has had a certain issue. It could be mental health issues. It could be, for example, that there's been something with their family, with their kids. It could be that they're, they were caught up, embroiled in some type of legal dispute, or their business was in trouble. For you to bring up their misbehavior, quote unquote, something that they would be ashamed of, would also be wrong. That is another time for us to remain silent. So he gives a beautiful summary, and he says as follows: In sum, just as when one makes a door for his house, he has a time to open it and a time to keep it closed, so should one keep closed the doors of his mouth, for he has two doors, and his lips and his teeth. So our lips and our teeth are what are the doors to the gateway, which is our mouths and our tongues. Our tongue is hidden behind the teeth and behind our lips, and it is well known statement in our sages that the Almighty made us this way so that we have this, as it were, double doors, which are protecting, shielding, guarding us from speaking badly. So the idea is that we are able to utilize and implement, right, the safeguards that we have to ensure that we are careful and we think twice before we make statements that we regret. Okay, so that is all we are going to say about silence. Okay, we know that there are occasions where one is rewarded for silence. For example, perhaps one of the most famous ones was with Abraham and Sarah were traveling, and they had to go down to Egypt because there was a famine. And Abraham, to ensure the well-being of the family, had to state that Sarah was his sister, which was in those days, being a tribe, sister, brother, that's the way people refer to one another, although she was, of course, also his wife. So Eliezer, not Eliezer, his nephew who was traveling with him, right, Lot, could have spoken up and said something against Abraham and said, well, she's not only your sister, she's also your wife. But he didn't, and his silence was rewarded years later. So silence is something that we should utilize more and more, and it will ensure that when we do speak, those statements are something that people pay attention to and people respect us for our opinions. So conversely, there are times where it is a sin to remain silent. It is a transgression, and that we mentioned would be for instances where people are mocking or people are deriding, or there is time for reproof and telling people the right thing to do. So to remain silent and allow your kids to do everything and anything under the sun and turn a blind eye to it would also be wrong. You have to know yourself and have to know the situation and be guided when it is the right time to speak up and when it is the time for silence. But as King Solomon said, the Kolosman voice, there's a time for everything. We just have to know, the wisdom is to know when to utilize each of these character traits. So we carry on with Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He causes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even when I walk in the valley of darkness, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You set a table before me in the presence of my adversaries. You anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of days. Continue now with a memorial prayer. Adon Elohim Zocho Es Nishmos Leah Bat Vaivot Harav Yaakov Tzvi Ben David Aryeh Tzivia Bat Mordechai from Ben David Slavin Shalom Ben Yisrael Morris Sipar Fegel Bas Ruven Baruch Shalom Ben Elili Beina Bas Vaivot from Moshe Shalom was Yaakov Shmuel Kela Beila Bas Henach Yom Yochid Ben Echad Moshe Eliezer Sharon Malka Bas Binyamin. As well as the yacht sites for today. Gito Bas Shlomo Hopton, Latan Ben David Solomon, Yeshua Beklonimus Ben Michal Black, Shana Bas Yitzchak Silverman, Carl Richmond Shal Cholilaman Bagan Aiden Taymanu Kostam Lachem Balarachamim, Yasirin Visisa Kanafavlanamim, Yisrael Zachain Nishmasamadina, Nachlasam, Yanucha Bashlam Mishkavam, the Namar. Amen. So that's it for today, friends. Wish everyone well. Looking forward to tomorrow, please God. Tonight, our second part in our well-being series, well worth hearing and learning about how to look after ourselves, especially in the current climate. I'm going to put that up now. Look after yourselves, keep safe, keep well, and we'll see you tonight as well as tomorrow.